Great. Welcome, everybody. This is one of our first Fireside Chats that we're putting on with the Founders Institute and under Arkisys. This is truly supposed to be an informal discussion where we pick up a topic that we think is of interest relative to the overall ecosystem that we hope are going to help proliferate relative to on-orbit servicing. So today's Fireside Chat is going to talk a little bit about undiscovered markets. And the way we'll run this is a short presentation that I'll use to hopefully seed folks' thought processes as it goes forward. And then we're going to basically open it up to a panel of various selected folks that are actually joining us here inside the Fireside Chat that we've sort of pre-selected and identified that we thought would be good connections. And then we'll basically have an open discussion. So that's the format. We appreciate it. For those that are coming in late, we apologize for the Zoom snafu, but things will get hopefully updated very quickly and you'll be able to sign in. So, right, I think I'll jump off. Hopefully the Prezi will work. Close this. So gonna sort of start talking about what is the current market and the thoughts related to that. So that's essentially the goal that we're gonna start with. So it's obviously good to start with sort of what is the market, if you will. If you take a look at the global space economy by the numbers, Bryce does a really good layout of this that you guys can look at all the time. What's interesting about this is if you begin to take a step back and you look at the numbers and you begin to sort of think about what's happening in the world today. So one of the first things that jumps out in all honesty is that in the news everywhere, you hear the most about launch. That seems to dominate everything. And yet, if you actually look at how much money out of the global space economy launch is generating or generates, it's really, really small. It's that number on the left-hand side over there. So $6.2 billion basically on launch, right? The next one that you hear about is from all the various companies that are building the spacecraft. And so you see the markers on, at least here in Los Angeles, the side of the road, Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman, right? But those that actually manufacture and build them are also a relatively small sliver related to the overall market. That's the 19.5 billion. The rest of it is either the ground equipment to actually get things from space into people's hands, or it becomes the overall commercial satellite market and the services that are being provided, which is really sort of fascinating. So that's really where that market is. There is no question that the government itself is in essence a market because they spend a bunch of money that supports all of that. So, okay, that's sort of interesting if you look at it from the top level. When I take a look at that and begin to think about the breakout related to that, so where is the market? Well, there's no question that almost the entire market from space is on Earth. It's dominated by all the services and products that space provides, the televisions that we're able to see, the broadband connections, the communications that occur all over the place. So it's really space to Earth. That's really the market of space, if you will. There is an up and coming market, which is really a business to business market, that is the space to space. And I'm sort of thinking of that in terms of satellite servicing, human spaceflight, long duration platforms, manufacturing, mining, et cetera. Again, the interesting thing about that though is that market is servicing the dominant one, which is again, Earth focused. So everything sort of points back at the Earth. So then what is this thing called the undiscovered markets? You might think of it, or you might have heard of it as the mythical $1 trillion market that somehow combines both the Earth focus as well as the space and something else, right? That's where there's always a lot of hand waving that occurs with that. So, okay, that's sort of interesting. Well, our view, and part of the reason that we're even here and attempting to get into this business is that there is an analogy that is somewhat interesting that provides an opportunity to sort of bring multiple markets together. And so the analogy on the ground, or more correctly on the ocean, is that there are harbors which a whole bunch of vessels come together and you can generate a port, which now you can do things. And so you could focus on that Earth-focused market, except in this case, it's in space. You can also begin to look at the instantiation of the space to space or the business to business that's supporting the platforms that are, again, looking at the Earth. But, again, our vision, my vision is that we want to look out, right? This is sort of the next generation, the time to look out. So what will those new markets be? And, generically, we sort of talk about the moon, we talk about other planets, potentially seeding outposts that are out there. So that's again, I'm generating things to sort of seed ideas and thoughts as we go forward. So sort of the next step then is what is undiscovered? What are we really talking about here? Very simple. And again, you can smack me. I didn't bring this with an MBA. That's not the intention. The intention is really sort of informally talking about this. So from my simple-minded vernacular, what is a market? First and foremost, well, it's a product or service that supports a need from people to solve a problem or satisfy a desire. Just that simple, right? Very straightforward. So what is the space market? Well, it is traditionally focused on a product or service for people on Earth. Again, we go back to what is that $360 billion servicing? It's the bloody Earth. What is an undiscovered market? Then potentially in space, well, this is where I'm not quite sure, but a need or desire that people don't yet know that they're missing, right? And that's what's sort of interesting. The thread throughout all of this, which a lot of times engineers, especially in the space business, somewhat forget, is that it's all driven by people. That's the thing that ties it all together, right? So we have to sort of think about that and never sort of forget that. All right, so how do you go about discovering a new market, right? This becomes sort of the biggest question. Entrepreneurs, scientists, folks in general ask the question to sort of come up with a way to do that is, if we could only do X, then people could do Y, and wouldn't that be amazing, right? And that's basically the pitch that every VC person thinks about, that somebody walks in and says, yeah, man, if we could do this, then we can unleash this, right? So there's a reaction, there's a postulation and a reaction. So just to, again, don't shoot me for coming up with the ideas. The idea is to brainstorm it, and then there's a lot of smart people on the call that'll hopefully be able to roll this in. But traditional thought, as an example, might be, if you can assemble on orbit, then you can build a big antenna. That's great. That's absolutely no question about it. We know that there's limitations in size for the fairings in this particular case, and therefore, if you want to build something that's a kilometer in size, you can't pack it all up inside of a fairing. DARPA just came out with a proposals day that's coming up to talk about new concepts in materials and structures to potentially do that. That's great. That's absolutely great. The functional benefit in that particular case is it addresses better communication. That's awesome. That's great. So, okay, an undiscovered thought. And again, this is rattling around inside my brain, may or may not be necessarily linear, but let's think about a little bit differently. If you can grow a platform on orbit, then you potentially could not just skip the building, but you could go right to operating anything. And what might the functional benefit example be? Well, not just better communications, but also better living quarters, the ability to thermally or fluidly transport, long duration platforms that constantly scale to support whatever is needed, right? It's almost like, if we could only this, then people could Y. But I'm wondering if we really have to think differently about what the right question is to suss out and tease out that undiscovered thought. So again, brainstorming only, I have no solutions here. I'm just trying to throw it out to the audience for discussions here. That's great. This all sounds wonderful, but what are the impediments? Sorry, we're here we go. Awesome, the impediments. I actually love the Gardner hype cycle. I think it's always amusing. I think it's real. It's fascinating. There's all kinds of studies that have been going on it. So some of the antibodies against sort of doing what I'll call undiscovered thought processes. There is the issue of pace of ideas to instantiation. There's no question about it. The Gardner life cycle or hype cycle actually begins to show a chart relative to that. And you can actually plot many of these things in particular industries. I find it fascinating. I have not been able to find a space hype cycle. It could be because I haven't searched hard enough, but it didn't immediately jump out. This is the latest one from 2020 that came out. And I love these things because it talks about really the peak of inflated expectations, which is really what we all do with really cool new things. And then there's the trough of disillusionment, which eventually it crashes and burns that you really can't do all these cool things. And then there's, well, wait a minute, if we just tweak this, an enlightenment phase that says, yes, we might actually be able to get there. So, antibodies to doing these kinds of sort of discoveries in undiscovered markets, in some cases, follows a pace of ideas to instantiation. The other one, which is always fascinating to me, and I have to say, as an engineer diving into the whole business world related to VCs and all that, it's just sort of mind-boggling. It's this circular funding conundrum that apparently just eats yourself. So that it sort of goes like a VC or one of us, an entrepreneur, comes up with a really cool tech idea, and you pitch it to a VC or somebody with funding and financing, and they think, hey, that's a really great idea, but okay, where's the market? As well, if you don't have it exactly identified, and we're talking about things that are completely new, right? That's the goal. Well, it's not yet there, but we know it's going to come. We know it's going to be there. The result is a pat on the head and a hit in the rear end come back when there is a market. So, but then you need money in order to create the thing, in order to generate the market. And so if you can't see the picture, it was as close as I could get to sort of shooting oneself in the foot, that it's just this really circular logic that you eventually come up with. So it's sort of fascinating, somewhat frustrating, but nonetheless, these are antibodies that we sort of have to attempt to uncover to discover an undiscovered market. So how do you break through it? Well, again, what I'm doing is I'm seeding ideas for us to discuss. One of the things that I absolutely would love to be able to do, and that's why we're essentially in business, is to enable these to happen. Well, there's sort of two approaches. One is there's innovation, which I argue is an evolutionary stepwise improvement to either a process or service within a particular discipline that allows revenue to be generated, which is outstanding. That's great. And then there are those revolutionary changes or brand new inventions or new methods that disrupt or completely create a new discipline that changes how people use or interact with each other or with a particular entity. And the interesting thing, I just wrote a LinkedIn thing because I was a little frustrated because the US has just fallen off the top 10 of the World Innovation Index. And I thought, how can that be? So I went and I did a little bit more digging. And as it turns out, I had to ask the question, what is innovation? How is innovation measured? And it turns out that at least in this particular instance, they measure the number of patents. Well, okay, I get it. That's a quantifiable entity. But then if you dig a little bit further, you begin to look that the patents are really, they're not discovery patents. We figured out how to make this thing a little bit better that nobody else has thought of. And so it essentially builds upon itself. It's a stepwise set of evolutionary improvements. Well, okay, that's all right. I guess that's a way to measure for sure. But where are the discoveries? Where are those things identified? So I postulated that wouldn't it be cool if we really could focus on the discovery in order to really make those big leaps. So I don't know. I argue that the breakthroughs may actually come from a combination of innovation in existing uses because we have to make money. It's the reality. And the hope is that doing some of those innovations and maybe experimentation, we can actually find the discoveries that change or actually nullify existing uses in some other method. So I think there's some combination that's there that we could effectively support. So, okay, so this is sort of the my throwing darts out to everybody and to see if something might stick. And this is meant to spur some thoughts, hopefully in the discussion session here. So what are some of those potential crazy thoughts related to things in space that we might want to think about? Well, in one particular area, I actually think the arts and the entertainment is a very robust and rich environment to potentially explore. Okay, well, how would you do that besides doing painting in space or some sort of structure? Well, what's interesting is you could potentially create objects or pattern in orbits that could either be viewed from orbit or from the ground, which would be sort of fascinating. I mean, I grew up with going to planetariums and was fascinated by that huge device that was in the middle of the room that projected stars exactly the way that they're in the night sky, and they could project animals moving across, right? You could see the zodiacs. Why is it not possible we might be able to do that in space? I would argue that Elon has proved it, albeit probably to a negative effect without consulting with the world's astronomers. But nonetheless, it's possible. Or develop a public telescope that anybody can sign into on Earth and look at something. The other one is games. I mean, you sort of look at what is the thing that drives industry, and okay, besides the thing we really don't want to go into in space, pornography, one of the other things is gaming. Folks really drive into doing games. Well, can we do some sort of game on Earth or game in space that folks are able to specifically interact with? That becomes the great idea. So it turns out that there's a group at USC that's actually working on a senior design project to figure out what kind of games you might be able to do. Construction is the other one. What if you could create self-annealing elements that form structures literally just by touching themselves? So the idea of assembling, but in this case, you literally just touch things together. I love the idea of 3D printing. That's not surprising. Made in Space has proved it. But 3D printing, we always deal with just a single instantiation of structures. Why not electronics and dynamical systems automatically come out, right? The ability to formation fly with no propellant. There's actually a company working on that specifically that we hope to actually help enable, which now allows you to do literally not connect together, but you can stay completely close together. And the other one that I sort of really like is this mergence of biology with structures, which is literally growing structures that live in a harsh space or harsh environment. Communication has a number of them. Power has a number of them. And then biology for sciences, the amazing thing that you might be able to do with scalable manufacturing of materials for various specific industries, or even regenerative medicines or tissue engineering that could really support self-healing products. I mean, all of these, again, they wax between innovation versus sort of discovery level. And all I'm doing is suggesting ideas that we might be able to identify relative to discovery markets. Whoops, sorry guys. Let's do this. All right. I think at this point, really, I just sort of wanted to end with another interesting observation. If you go to the Small Business Administration, you'll find some amazing statistics, which I didn't realize until I actually went there. 99% of all the businesses in the US are small businesses. They define small businesses as less than 500 employees. 89% of all businesses in the US have less than 20 employees. That to me is absolutely fascinating. What does that tell me? That actually tells me that all the small businesses that are starting up in space are on the right track. But what I haven't been able to find necessarily is how many businesses that are doing business in space fall within the small business category, because we typically only think about the really big ones, Lockheed, now SpaceX, et cetera. So I find that fascinating. I I resonate with small businesses and love to be able to enable that. The picture on the left-hand side does have significance. I know it's very hard for you to see. If you could read the sign that's on that building, you would read the Barnhart Candy Factory. This was actually a factory that was built by my grandfather back in literally 1929. That's his Ford that you see sitting out front that he started. He didn't necessarily succeed. What happened is that he joined with another individual named Gladio, and it turns out that they could make more money by making vending machines, and Gladio became the largest vending machine manufacturer in the Northeast at the time. So that's how it worked. I have to say that I do credit my grandfather for being here today, because on the factory floor, he actually met his then becoming wife, who became my grandmother, and finally we were all sort of came in. The picture on the right-hand side is what I'm hoping to essentially enable as my first support to this notion of small businesses to be able to help everybody else in terms of incremental innovation. So we will now sort of stop listening to me, and I'd like to open it up specifically to what folks that I'd like to bring in to sort of support as a panel. And honestly, this is meant to be informal. That's what this is, a fireside chat. So questions from anybody I think is great. We do have to sort of respect the folks that are here. So I would like questions to be sent or put into the Q&A, if you will. Let me first introduce Chris Thayer, who's the president and CEO of Motive Space Systems. Just want to make sure we're all set. And Chris, that you're there.
I am here.
Just want to make sure. Awesome. Thanks very much. Also introduce Ron Godendorp, who is now leading something called GoGo Ventures, but he most recently came from Nanoracks as a strategic executive inside Nanoracks and took it from with Jeff and the folks there from nothing to where it is today, which is outstanding. And then also Adam Call, are you on? We there? Is Adam there? Okay.
I don't see him on.
Don't see him on. Okay, well, all right, it won't be there. And then one that we want to bring in, because I was trying to have somebody from a robotics and a little bit larger, somebody who's worked in the industry but is now looking at sort of expanding. Adam is actually representing a startup, sort of a young group. And then introduce Phnom Bagley, who is actually here in the California area that's doing a lot of really interesting space architecture discussion kinds of work. So to try to bring different voices together to think about the problem a little bit differently. So thanks very much, Phnom, really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So I think what I'll do is I'll stop sharing and then we can sort of see everybody, because again, this is supposed to be informal, don't need background on here. That way we can sort of see folks. And one last call for Adam, just to make sure he's there. Crap, okay, well, no worries. So let's see, I'll try to kick off with just a key question, in all honesty, to the panel, and then please, folks, definitely open it up. The one question to the panel is, now that I've sort of laid this out, do you agree or do you see something different relative to what I've identified as undiscovered? Because that was sort of the topic here, right? How do we discover the undiscovered? How do we step into a market that doesn't exist and convince folks? So I don't know, Ron, I'll start with you.
It's not like I'm an industry veteran anymore. Yeah, I mean, part of the challenge of many companies in the new space industry, for lack of a better description, right? They start talking to folks like you, me, Dave, and Dan, and a few others. They'll come out of college, they'll have had experience, but they're often not multidisciplinary. And I look at most of the problems in space, and thinking about how to monetize space as challenges of multiple disciplines, right? Somebody's good at ground segment, somebody's good at biology. They may not be good at space biology. Somebody who's good at space biology may not understand the limitations of scaling up from R&D to manufacturing. And that's kind of the, right, these global thinkers they necessarily need to be young, because this is an industry that is not fast moving. Back to the multidisciplinary answer. These young groups or young thinkers need to be put together in an area where the molecules can bounce around. Instead of looking for entropy, we want to concentrate them. I even look at some things like the events and small sat's a good example, where a bunch of molecules are slamming together. That we need to see that environment in order to really tap or bring to the surface those undiscovered markets. Somebody needs to talk about biology and cross-pollinate with somebody who understands process chemistry, right? And somebody who's worked with experiments in microgravity, right? And I keep coming back to that. The companies that I've seen successful and have attracted money and brought things past the seed stage in this area are capable on a multidisciplinary basis. And I'll put a pause there.
Confluence of disciplines all sort of coming together. Okay, well, that's good. I appreciate that. Chris, same general question.
Yeah, I think you really need to be able to kind of see the landscape with what's even possible. That's one thing that the U.S. government has done in space since the 50s. You know, proving that something's possible, and then commercial markets can come in and utilize that, because oftentimes the commercial market's going to be more hesitant to engage if they don't know there's a there. So I think that's really an important thing, is getting those early proof of concepts done, and then having that infrastructure and ecosystem up there that they can then be utilized simply and quickly for other entrepreneurs.
Great, Phnom. Love to have your thoughts on this. We've never engaged before, so this is actually good, I think, right? So
Yeah. I actually connected a lot to what Ron was saying, the fact that we need to be multidisciplinary in order to innovate in this world. That's actually why I quit the space industry for about 10 years, actually more than that, to focus on Earth-bound innovation and technology. I want to go as far as possible in the healthcare, telehealth, brain stimulation, type of technology, to see how far we can support humans, on Earth, in order to solve the problem supporting humans in space, right? My whole focus in the space industry is how to make it more human, because right now we're training, highly professional astronauts for a long time with millions of dollars each, to send them up to an environment that's is barely livable. But when we think about long-term missions, like going to Mars, which is going to take 2.5, 3 years, we have to completely rethink about what it means to live in space, and create technology that supports thriving in space, right? And as time passes by, we will send less and less trained people. People like you and me are going to go to space in a matter of decades, right? So what is going to help us, protect ourselves physically from all the harm of this extreme environment, from all that we're learning right now, but also all the unpredictable, right? Everything that is human is unpredictable. And how do you create plan B, plan C, plan D in all of these scenarios? Another thing that I want to bring up is hierarchy of importance of disciplines. So far we've put, math, engineering, physics and all that at the forefront of space exploration, and for good reasons. We have rockets going to space because of that. But putting biology, putting all of these things as secondary or tertiary on the food chain is going to be more and more harmful to the way we develop the space industry. So let's think about them at the same level, and think of where we start innovating. It's going to be a multiple points, type of thing. Is going to be more complex. Is going to take many different disciplines that have never spoken to each other to connect with each other and start building, fields that we don't have names for today, in order to get to a place that is truly going to revolutionize the future of space.
No, that's interesting. You refer to it's interesting because traditionally a spacecraft program is broken into very specific sort of individual elements. There's the ground segment, the space segment. The space segment is broken into the spacecraft and the payload. The payload, as we showed in the very first chart, is the one that generates the money, but it's the one that is actually sort of, oh, please, Mr. Spacecraft or Miss Spacecraft, can you please take me up, right? Where you're suggesting that we should reverse that hierarchy, right? I mean, in design, you start with a payload, or you start with something that you want to put up, and then you build around it. But it may be more of an approach that's taken that we might have to change. So, yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that. Justin actually had a question that I thought was good. The concept of the ecosystem that supports these undiscovered markets. There's a number of them. There's inspection. There's repair. Right now, the one that seems to be pretty hot is refueling, and that's something that extends the life of an existing satellite, which you don't have to change necessarily. You just have to add the fuel to. But I'm wondering what anybody else thinks might be something that is successful, or something that would be up and coming to actually launch an enterprise into, relative to any of these other potential servicing, approaches or areas.
I mean, I'd leap in real quick with, at least at the time that I left NanoRax, the setup was for servicing or setting up for in-space warehouses, repurposing upper stages of rockets, right? Mm-hmm. And then repurposing them, right, for manufacturing facilities, for either food manufacture or refueling stations, and the one that kept popping up, going back to the kind of both the arts and entertainment, was games, right? Microgravity arenas. I thought, okay, that'd be cool. Takes a lot to do. And then the other piece is space tourism. Let's never forget that a lot of people still want to go to space, and a lot of people with a lot of money just wouldn't mind a couple nights in the microgravity hotel. Maybe it'll be the Madonna Inn of space, right? Yeah.
Does everybody?
I don't know that answers the question, but that's where my thought went.
Sorry, Fernando, you asked the question. Do we all? I wasn't sure what the Madonna Inn is, honestly. So that's.
Oh. The Madonna Inn is basically the temple of kitsch that you can.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry. All right, yeah, got it. Yeah. I noticed Lee Irons is on, and Lee's working in the biological field, as well as Heath and Olivia. So I let me throw out to at least those that are working in the biological field relative to what we might be able to do in science. I gave the example of an undiscovered potential market that would change things by, instead of assembling, we grow it. but I was referring to a thing, not food necessarily. And oh my gosh, what's the name of the show where the spacecraft is a living spacecraft and then it talks back to the people inside? It's a science fiction show. Anyway, it's that it shows my age. So let me throw it out to Lee and Heath and Olivia. Any thoughts related to that? Because what's interesting is that brings in what Phnom was talking about, which is start with the science of the biology and then work backwards into a space market. So just be interested to hear your thoughts.
Hey, Dave, this is Heath Mills from Rhodium Scientific. And
Thanks.
yeah, it's good hearing this conversation starting and building here. The biological side is something that we're obviously focused in on and trying to identify some of those undiscovered markets and trying to build those. I think that the port and having more routine access to microgravity can have advanced impact on many different biotech markets. You mentioned the synthetic biology, the tissue engineering, engineered cell systems, pharmaceutical markets, even energy industry can have an impact within the microgravity environment. Having the capacity to do experiments that may not be suitable for, say, the ISS due to the chemical constraints, radiological impact, or even scalability according to size and need to do larger experiments. That's where I think that the port and this discussion can really take off with these markets. If you really need to build something bigger, grow something bigger, test something new, and even with a more of a proprietary push towards it, we feel that this may have some interesting impact on those markets. And I'd be interested to hear anybody's conversation on that.
Hey Lee, I see you're following the Fireside Chat with the hat and very casual. Perfect. So didn't know if you had any. Oh yeah, okay. Didn't know if you had any thoughts.
Actually, I wanted to jump in about the question of biology and integrating into architecture. I think it's extremely interesting. I mean, we're starting to integrate that with software using generative design, computational design to create extremely complex geometry that is reminiscent of nature, biomimetics, biomimicry, and really integrating natural systems or creating artificial systems that are inspired by natural systems, like artificial photosynthesis, for example, or creation of melanin, which can protect us in theory against certain types of radiation. So all of this is going to be very, very useful to develop in the next few decades. And I'm particularly interested in how that can be brought back to the way we continue the evolution of architectures on Earth. So because more and more places on Earth are becoming extreme environments, right? A lot of the beach, waterfront countries right now are going to disappear. People will have to move. So how do you create architecture that can actually protect the people who live in them?
So of course the conundrum with biology and engineering is the question of redundancy, and it's with biology, redundancy doesn't work the same way. You can have redundant biological systems. If line 1 goes down, you have line 2 as a backup. But in general, if line 1 goes down as a result of a biological failure, line 2 is probably going to go down shortly thereafter. And it's going to take you 2, 5, 10 years to figure out what went wrong. So with biology, the way you get redundancy is from diversity, not from single solution, multiple line type of setups, but where you have a function that from a diversity perspective is provided by multiple things within your system. And so if one of those things fails, you have other things available as a backup. That's effectively what we live in here on Earth, is we have a diversity of life. Just look at plant life, all of these different plants providing oxygen. No one plant or one species or even one biome having multiple species fail is going to cause you to lose your oxygen source, because there's always other plants that aren't failing. So I think that's the inherent challenge with integrating biology into engineering and maybe having these growing systems, is understanding the failure modes and what redundancy really means in that kind of a system.
John, you wanted to open it up. You had you're actually working a really interesting architecture and development activity that I think is absolutely necessary. One of the questions you suggested was that, let's start with tourism, and I think it was identified that there's a lot of folks that have a lot of money that might be able to get up there. If anybody's done a budgetary analysis to argue that one company can make enough money on rich folks that it could generate and create sort of the opening for additional markets and services that support the people to go up?
Who's this question for?
That's for you.
Okay, I didn't hear you start off. Your microphone was canceled out, so I just heard the follow on. Good question. I think that all of us have the same problem, and that's money. We're going to do really amazing things when we're all funded. But to open up those markets, we have to follow the direction given by the first 7 astronauts who've already spent the money to go into space. Yeah. And so if you can go with that thrust of following that initial investment that was made for an experience which we all know was not very pleasant, bad food, bad habitation, and we're not even talking about the health problems if there's some of them had in the short term, but in the long term too. But still the desire is powerful there. So once those of us who are involved in the industry of supporting space tourism, which is fuel depots, which is habitation, which is space construction, once we can get that thrust going, everything else is going to follow in right behind it. And that's all made possible, of course, by affordable launch. Starship is going to, just in the next very few years, is going to open up that entire sector. And that's why we've started developing space construction tools and machines to build large structures quickly. And those of you who know, we just had a demonstration of our D-Star. It was just a real initial demonstration. We have another one coming on in 6 weeks of showing how we can build large truss, 2 meters by 2 meters, for 100 meters long in 100 minutes. And that is going to, it's a demonstration of what we can do, but imagine the imaginations that are going to be fired with that. All you have to do to keep going is reload our magazines, and we can keep building more and more truss. We can build it straight, we can build it circular. And guys like John Mankins come along and says, this is how we're going to build our space power platforms. And other people that come along and same thing, saying the same. This is how we're going to build our settlements quickly. So it all follows those people that are going to go up there. That space tourism. That's where we're going to initiate a lot of what we want to do.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I resonate with that. I also I definitely understand. Fanam suggested that, yeah, we want to go up, right? And I don't want to have to train for 8 years, and that's the only thing I do. And the other thing that's interesting to me about the past astronauts is that they are supported by 100 to 1,000 people on the ground all the time. And I think somehow we have to get away from that. It has to be ubiquitous in safety and operations to be able to have a bunch more to go up there. But you're right, you increase the pace, and that's great.
Yeah, we all want that airline style operation. We all want to be able to buy a ticket, maybe a week or two of training for the safety systems, and then we go. Yeah. And that's coming. It's coming faster than a lot of us really know, because Starship's going to be able to build the structures. I mean, Space Fab, they want to build fuel depots. They're going to build really big fuel depots up there. very soon because it's going to be affordable to do.
Orbit Fab, I think.
Orbit Fab, excuse me. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, Adam's here, so we want to.
Right.
Shout out.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes. It's all going to start. It's going to happen just the next couple of years. And you know, a lot of us have this mindset from our past of this $1,000 or $10,000 per pound idea, and that's going to go away. And you know, the new players that step forward with the new money and the new ideas, you know, they're attending your college right now, Dave. Those students, when they see this happening, they're going to come up with ideas that are going to be astounding to even us who've been trying to project our ideas in the future.
Awesome.
There's a lot of young people out there right now with lots of ideas, and they don't know how to get anybody to pay any attention to them. They're having the same problem that we are, except at a lower tier.
A level down.
You know,
So,
we're trying to get ideas funded by millions of dollars, and these young people are coming out with ideas, and they're just trying to find somebody to listen to their idea.
That's true. But you know, in the last couple of years, we have seen extraordinary amounts going into the space sector. And I don't think that's going to end. I think that's going to increase because there's money to be made there. And the investors are just starting to get onto this idea that they can get a return, not just on the satellites and the non-human operations, but actually taking people into space in all these habitation proposals that have been popping up like crazy because they're looking at those future launch costs. They're saying, okay, now I can send someone into space for a week-long experience for 1/10 of the cost of going to ISS. And it's not just those billionaires anymore. Now we're talking lots of 100 millionaires or 10 millionaires and so forth. They're all going to say, yeah, I'll do it. I'll go.
I mean, key to that really is the quick turnaround time, not just for human cargo, but for experiments, that sort of thing. If you're going to a non-human platform, right? As soon as facilities are created where it doesn't have a human habitat attached, the safety process just gets shortened. All these things we get better at. The thousands of people that were formerly needed to support one astronaut can now be done with 2 or 3 on the ground, right? All these things become automated. We're getting better at this, and it is a reason to attract investment. Yeah, this is going to be a very exciting couple of years, bar the last year, right? But next few years are going to be, they're going to leave my head spinning.
Yes, exactly. You know, that Japanese astronaut, artist, you know, he came out of nowhere. I didn't see that coming. I don't even think SpaceX saw that coming. And now we have another guy who's signed up who wants to go up on a Dragon. He's going to take along a couple extra people for free. You know, and this is going to happen tenfold because the prices just keep coming down. It's going to be an extraordinary time. The ideas that we have right now, they're probably not big enough to support what's going to happen. It's going to be very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Okay. Well, ladies and gents, I really appreciate it. I want to stick to the hour timeline just because I think everybody's time is precious and important, and actually really appreciate everybody's comments and inputs here. The hope was, honestly, with this particular discussion is, while yes, space tourism absolutely is a market, there's no question about it. I'm truly the most interested in, what Lee was referring to, the kid in the basement who nobody knows they're going to come up with that $1 billion application, but that at the moment they don't have the mechanism by which to be able to support and test and validate and do all those things. So the hope is that the ecosystem that we actually have being developed, that one of the things we want to be part of, and that Orbit Fab is there, John, you're working on, Ron, you've worked on, everybody, is that we sort of enable that. What I was most interested in is this concept of undiscovered, that we all viscerally feel that if we could just do this, we'll do amazing things, right? Which we can never sell to VCs on the money. But I honestly think it's real. There was one comment in the chat from RPOs that said that, you know, the discoveries come at the lowest levels, the atom levels, the joule levels, those kinds of things. So I'm fascinated to hope that we can support, we can be part of the innovation and or discovery at that level that, you know, will eventually open up these undiscovered markets. So
Awesome.
Want to thank everybody. Ron, thanks very much for joining us. Phenom, it was really great to meet you. Thanks very much for joining us. Chris, appreciate you being here as well. And talking with John and Lee, Adam, everybody else that was here. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. And honestly, there was no, it wasn't meant to be a sales pitch in any way. It meant was specifically to talk about this is sort of interest to us all, and how do we make that next step? Just like you said, Lee, we're fighting for millions of dollars to get out there, but it's going to take a bunch to sort of convince folks that man, there's really amazing things that are going to happen, and we want to make that happen. So, right, guys.
All right.
Thanks, David.
Thanks everybody. Really appreciate
Nice
it.
to meet you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Cheers.
Guys, have an awesome
Ciao.
evening. Cheers.